You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. We certainly appreciate you tuning in, and that other guy behind you, that other guy, and that other guy over there, and that gal over there, and that other group of gals, and just everybody, the horses, dogs, cats, everybody. Listen to the show. We certainly appreciate you all showing up today because you are the best people in the world. To see the video version of this, go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification button. It will give you pleasure and make you feel fulfilled in ways you probably already been fulfilled before, but you'll get it again. So that's the beauty of the bell. Ding! Notification. Go to thecvpn.com. You can subscribe to all 9 podcasts. Also, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. You can follow me over there, see what I'm reading, see what I'm reviewing, all that sort of good stuff. Also, you can go to facebook.com/Chris, the Chris Voss Show. And if you just search the Chris Voss Show, there's like a whole mess of groups we have as well, too, which are pretty cool. And you can see what we're posting over there. My author, we, of course, have the brilliantest authors on the Chris Voss Show. Just people that will expand your mind, make you think, make you better. And, you know, if you think better, you're actually better looking and more sexy. This will improve your Tinder profile results and everything else. Today we have Adam Lotz. He is the Creationism USA author, Bridging the Impasse on Teaching Evolution. It's from Oxford University Press. You know those folks over at Oxford, they're always brilliant. Adam is no creationist. He taught middle school and high school for 10 years in Milwaukee, and now he is a professor of education at Binghamton University, State University of New York. He studies the history of culture wars in America's schools and has published books like Creationism USA, Fundamentalist You, and the Other School Reformers. Welcome to the show, Adam. How are you?
Hey, great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So, Adam, give me your plugs. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
I tweet. My name is Adam Lotz, so I'm at Adam Lotz, Laats. And then the books are available, obviously, on Amazon or anywhere else. Creationism USA, the publisher, Oxford University Press.
There you go. Lots of brilliant people we've had on from Oxford University Press. That's
good school. Good school.
They clearly won't let me in, so that's why we have you on. So
all I've got is my Oxford shirt, and that's the closest I'm going to get.
So you've written this book. Give us what motivated you want to write this book on creationism?
Yeah, thanks. I'm a historian, and I had written about, and most of my stuff was about the history of schools, especially the way people fight about schools. As I mentioned, generally at home, I'm only limited to 25 words or less, about any of that stuff. And I think it's a good policy. I'm not allowed to talk about Star Trek either, or the history of submarines. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff I'm not allowed to talk about.
Well, the history of submarines is very controversial.
Well,
I mean, if you've ever seen Red October, that's some controversy right there.
All right. Yeah. These are the things I'm not allowed to talk about at home. But look, one night we were sitting around, and my sister-in-law, she's a secular person like me, and the question that she had on her mind was like, all right, you're not going to talk about history and stuff, but I just want to know, like, what's the deal? How I think it was 2011 back then, how in the 21st century can there be so many people running around who won't admit that science is true, creationists? How can there be one of our whole political parties? I won't mention any names, but I think we all know which one. One of our parties is in thrall to these ideas, creationist ideas, that this was her question, that go against every single piece of science that is available. It doesn't take much, scientific knowledge to know that, like, our planet can't be only 6,000 years old. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to know that. I mean, that's like inject bleach level science.
Yeah. I mean, everyone knows that anything this flat can never be 6,000 years old.
Right. So that was her question. Like, just explain it to me. Like, how is it possible? And so, we talked, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a book to try to explain it, how this is possible. And it turned into this book.
There you go. So let's lay a foundation for those of people like me who went to Betsy DeVos Public School. What is creationism exactly? What's the definition of that?
Yeah.
I was thinking it was something to do with me having more kids or something.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Betsy DeVos Public School, that's called a private school, Chris.
Oh, well, I throw her into the book. Well, she's over public school. You're really breaking down my joke. Which is fun.
Yeah. Okay. So, and one of the arguments that I make in the book for people like Liz and me, secular people who just don't get it, one of the things is that, creationism, if you take a sort of general definition, the idea that God or gods or some sort of divine something had to be part of how, this all happened, you and me sitting here, the sun, the moon, the trees, that's super common. Like, you'd say almost every American has some version of that kind of creationism. And the kicker is that most people who are creationists, who think, gods were involved or God, they've got no problem with science. So it's not that creationism makes you doubt science. It's this specific kind of creationism that goes against mainstream science. In the book, I call them radical creationists. And it's not, if you drive through Kentucky, it's eye-popping, and you see this giant replica Noah's Ark, right next to the Florence Y'all sign. There's this huge ark in Kentucky, but it's not really the huge number of Americans that you might think.
So give us an overview of the book and what it's about.
Sure, absolutely. So to answer my sister-in-law's question, what's the deal with creationism? I start with a sort of a field guide. If you're an outsider, if you're not religious, or even if you are, there's lots of different kinds of creationism. Just as one, for example, I think a lot of us think of the sort of evangelical preacher creationist type, the sort of, TV preacher, that kind of creationist. And that's one kind for sure. But I mean, think of all the Catholics out there, the LDS, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They aren't really known as creationist religions because generally, LDS is a complicated story, but generally, if you're Catholic, your church, and Catholics are the biggest single religious group in the United States. Your church is creationist, but it's not, like creationist. Catholics don't go and build Noah's Arks in Kentucky. They build castles in Italy. So the first chapter looks at how you can be a different kinds of creationism in America. The second chapter looks at the history. One thing I think that is surprising to some people who don't know is that this kind of creationism, this young Earth creationism, it's new. It wasn't a thing in the early part of the 20th century. So you got all these fundamentalists running around the 1920s. They were fighting against evolution, but they, embarrassingly for today's young Earth crowd, they went out of their way to say a young Earth doesn't make any sense. That it's, you don't have to read the Bible that way. And these were the folks, they read the Bible as their main sort of source of inspiration, but the young Earth stuff is new. And it didn't come out of any of the big traditions, but rather came out of Seventh-day Adventism.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't know. You remember William Miller?
He was the creator of it. wasn't
Yeah, when I say remember, I mean remember reading about him in the 1840s. He predicted that Jesus was coming back. He had done it with math and the Bible. And in Vermont and upstate New York, there were a lot of believers, Adventists. They thought Jesus' advent was nigh. So some of them famously, not as many as the stereotype, but some of them sold all their stuff, and they put on white gowns and they got on top of their barns, and they're like, because William Miller said, all right, it's this day in October at this time, like an eclipse. And clearly the world didn't end that day.
It didn't?
Well, but see, for Miller's followers, especially one, Ellen G. White was she was young at the time, and she started having visions to explain what happened. And of course, they explained it in ways that made sense to them. Jesus did come. It's just that you couldn't see him.
He was on like a speed train tour. He was on a bus tour, and the bus just went through town.
There you go. He transformed heaven. So Ellen G. White founded this new religion, Seventh-day Adventists, and they're most famous, at least to heathens like me, for things like Little Debbie's. Little Debbie's, that's a Seventh-day Adventist snack food.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. No, there's no. It's the snack cake, or what do you call them? Swiss cake rolls.
Mm-hmm.
No lard. There's no lard.
Damn, you just ruined my whole Little Debbie's fetish.
Yeah. So
fetish.
The idea is Ellen G. White has all these visions, and one of them is you're not supposed to eat animals. So you need food that doesn't have animal stuff in it. We get Swiss cake rolls from Little Debbie's. But God took her on a tour of everything, the universe and creation. And so she saw God create the world in 6 days, like 6,000 years ago. So for her followers, it was a sort of it was an article of faith that the earth had to be young, and our species had to be, Shazam, Adam and Eve, in the garden, just like the book says. And most other like Baptists at that time in the up until the 1920s, they didn't believe any of that, but the Seventh-day Adventists did. So they keep preaching, and in the 60s, they convince enough people that this young Earth creationism is born, but it isn't born in the way we know it until the 1960s. So it's not like there's the ancient young Earth belief that sort of lingers. It's a very modern thing, and it was created only because mainstream science was getting more and more confident about how old the Earth had to be, that some religious people had to come up with a response. And the response in the 1960s was like, all right, say whatever you want. We know you're lying. The Earth is only 6,000 years old-ish.
Wow. See, I was raised LDS, and they taught us that. I think theirs was like 4,000 years old. There's like 2,000 pre and 2,000. I didn't keep good track of it because I didn't believe in it anyway. But yeah, I mean, basically it was that sort of premise. And then, as a kid or growing up and getting older, you'd read about, scientists discover this thing, and using technology, they've determined that, fossil whatever is like 10,000 years old. And you're like, wait, millions of eons, so what do you call someone like me who's an atheist, and I don't necessarily believe in something. I know that we have space dust in our DNA, so there might be some Mars origination, Big Bang. I don't really know. I'm not an agnostic either. I'm more leaning toward that space dust theory. But that I think what's his face talks about a lot. The scientist that you see, the African American scientist guy, really brilliant.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson, really brilliant. So I think I subscribe kind of his version, but I also take a science approach where it's like everything's a theory until it's disproven. What do you call people like me? I mean, what's the opposite, I guess, of creationism or?
Well, if I would come up with the term, my opinion and my argument in the book is that most Americans are creationists, but I don't care. Like, okay, they believe whatever they believe, but they don't try to like make schools teach science in a certain way.
Yeah.
They want schools to teach science.
Yeah.
So for people who are atheists, I think the same the same labels might work. A small number of Americans are atheists. They don't believe, that there was any spaghetti monster. There was nothing involved. It just happened. Accident isn't a word that the scientists like to use, but it was, and not random either, but it wasn't guided by anything externally intelligent. No divinity was involved, anything like that. I guess my term for that would be atheist, and with politeness, I'd say I just don't care about you. The only time that matters is if you get someone who would be a radical atheist who'd say, hey, the public schools have to teach children to believe in my beliefs, which is that it's, panspermia or stardust or whatever we want to call it. That my belief has to influence what goes on in school. And there's a difference between saying the best science, which is, the same things that I think. The best science should be influencing what goes on in public school. If you agree with that, that doesn't make you radical. But if you say kids have to be disabused of their notions about Jesus, we have to tell kids, you cannot believe in the Garden of Eden. It's bogus. That's child abuse for you to be taught that. I think that's radical atheism. And it doesn't sound like that's what you're saying.
Yeah. The thing I'm okay with, I learned a long time ago, and what I settled in with my atheism is it's okay for me. And I realized that in studying a lot of people and why they believe things, I realized that the universe is chaos. Life is chaos. It's a horror show for some people. It's terrifying for some people. It was when I was young. I was like, oh my God, this horrible world and bad things happen. And there's a need in our humanity to try and create order from that chaos as much as we can, or to feel like we have some sort of influence or control or mastery of it. Although some of it that's self-deluded. If you think you master the universe, wait till an earthquake or hurricane comes by and you'll find out, Mother Nature has their own plan. But I learned a long time ago that there's a lot of people that subscribe to these different sort of things. And I kind of look at them as like magazine subscriptions of thought or a catalog. And like, if people need to pick certain things to get through this experience of life and whatever is on the other side, well, then that's cool, man. Like, if somebody's got to be a Catholic, that's cool. Just don't hurt other people with it, and just don't force other people to believe it. And so I'm completely fine with it. I'm not knocking on doors like the Mormons or the Seventh-day Adventists on Saturday morning when you're hungover going, hey, have you heard about the big nothing? Like, after you die, it's just all black. You want to hear more about that shit? Because there's nothing more.
Yeah, and I think you and I it sounds like we're on the same page. In terms of policy and science in schools, I want to make sure in this book that everyone ends up, disliking me. So the thing that some advocates would say, and that I'm disagreeing with, people like Lawrence Krauss, for example, astrophysicist, Jerry Coyne at the University of Chicago, biologist, they advocate that it's child abuse for children to be taught these things that are patently untrue, like the human race, human species came out only 10,000 years ago, because they say, look, it can't possibly be true. You can't teach children that. We have to save these children by giving them the truth. This is where I disagree. I think if families, if things are abusive, like actually abusive, and there are some religions that hedge into that with, exorcisms and things like that, and that's abusive.
Suicide cults.
Yeah. Conversion therapies. I think these things really are abusive, and they're religious, and the government has not just a right, but a duty to intervene.
Yeah.
But, let me ask it to you this way, Chris. Say you're a middle school science teacher, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And you teach evolution for 2 weeks, and the kids kind of do their project, and this one kid does a good project, and he makes sort of like a phenotype chart of, how horses evolved. It demonstrates that he really gets it, in a good way.
Mhm.
And then, so you give him a grade at the science fair and you're like, all right, cool. And he's like, but Mr. Voss, I got to tell you, I know this is all bogus because I learned because I learned in church
Yeah.
that these ideas came from the devil to fool us and get us away from God's word in the Bible, which is, that we're only the planet's only 6,000 years old, and that there were dinosaurs on the boat, and the boat was real, and there was a real flood.
My reply would be, damn, you found us out.
Yeah.
You got us, kid. Now don't breed. No, life is a giant. I guess the one thing I've learned or settled on is life is a giant catalog. I mean, what you choose to do in life, your career path, your education path, everything it's a kaleidoscope of adventures and stories and paths that you can go on. And what's good for me, like I'm fine. I don't call people up or be like, you should be an atheist. It's really cool over here. The tithing is really cheap. And I try and be respectful of other people's religions as much as I can. In fact, I've had people on the show that are religious, and we've brought up the topic of, well, Chris, would you be okay if one of the issues you have with religion is it's so multifaceted and has so many different competing things. I think I saw once, maybe this reference from Chris Hitchens, we created like 3,000 gods of man. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who I believe is Baptist or one of the other main religions. And he said, would you have a problem if we promote our religion or we put our, 10 commandments on the courthouse steps? And I said, look, I honestly wouldn't have that much of a problem, but you got to be fair. So if you got to put ISIS's, whatever their thing is, the occult people or whatever their thing is, you got to have everybody. It's got to be inclusive, I think is the word I'm looking for. But the problem with some of the, ultra right-wing radical Christians, the white Christians especially, is they're just like, our faith is the only one. And sadly, you hear that from ISIS too. So if like all the religions can kind of work it all out to where everybody gets represented, yeah, I'm cool with it, man. You can put a little, I don't know, Big Bang explosion. I don't even want a plaque. I just don't give a shit.
Well, and I think that's part of what makes, for outsiders trying to understand American creationism. Mm-hmm. One of the it's not like hidden, but it seems surprising, is that the folks you're talking about, the sort of politically conservative, Baptist, Protestant, not always Baptist, but, Protestant, a lot of them from an evangelical tradition, although, some Lutherans and other non-evangelical groups as well. Often people assume that they are absolutely opposed to evolutionary theory. And once you start getting into and reading the culture and going to the museums and reading the literature, these days they're not. So, for example, if you go to Answers in Genesis, they're the folks who built the big ark in Kentucky, the Ark Encounter. Mm-hmm. Their official policy is that they do not want creationism taught in public schools, and in fact, they want evolutionary theory taught even in private schools that are, on their team. They're the schools that teach their kind of creationism. They want their kids to learn evolution, which seems like
they're making all this money off that boat.
Well, but Kentucky. They're not. So some of the folks that the watchdogs. This is a little side business, like the Answers in Genesis stuff are like 1 million people came, and then the watchdogs are like, actually, we can see the receipts, they're public because they got a tax break, and not that many people came. Like it's kind of a question of who's gonna go. And then there's people like me go, and we don't believe it. We just want to see the spectacle, sort of.
Yeah.
And it includes some stuff you wouldn't even guess, like diorama. I still don't understand this one because I don't know the Bible well enough. A diorama of a guy like in a gladiator fight with like a giant cyclops with a horn and stuff.
On the ark?
Well, yeah, well, it's kind of like the museum part of the Ark.
Oh,
So it's like,
is that supposed to be David or something? David and Goliath?
no, Goliath, I don't think he wasn't like a monster. He was just a big
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
So it was definitely like anyway, there's a bunch of stuff that you just don't expect if you're going from the outside. And one of them is, if you ask them, they'll say, oh, no, we actually want our kids to learn evolution. So in the book, here's one of the things I did. I read that from, their published stuff. And after doing this for years, I've been able to make some connections. So I asked some of the people that I've met from my work, and some celebrities. So there's a woman who's a homeschool mom in Virginia, and she had for a while I had a blog running about this stuff, and she was a regular contributor, and she was a young Earth creationist, and she was a homeschooler, and she first contacted me because she was trying to find ways to teach her kids, and she's a young Earth creationist homeschooling mom. She wanted to teach her kids evolution, and so I this is the first I'd heard of this. I thought she would not want to teach her kids evolution. This is before I, knew what Answers in Genesis was saying. So I went, and we have in our upstate New York where I live, there's some creation schools, like K-12 schools, and I went and I asked the principal of one of them, do you guys, for two questions. One, do you teach evolution? And do you brag about teaching evolution? Like to parents who are thinking about paying money to send their kids to a creationist school. And he said, yes, on both counts. Not only do we teach evolution, but we tell parents that they should send their kids here because we know how to teach evolution. And I think this is the key term. We know how to teach evolution right. Like they don't want to teach evolution the way I would want to teach evolution in a public school. They want their kids to know it, which is what I would want too. But then they want their kids to know what's wrong with it and why they don't believe it.
Oh, I was expecting you to say that, that they would teach evolution, but like God's hand was in it. Like God turned Jesus from a tadpole. Jesus turned the tadpole to a frog.
Well, there are those schools as well.
That's what I go with.
So there's a larger group of I think, you have to call them creationists. I think that God guided creationism or evolution, and that evolution is just God's tool. And that's a very large group of Christians, but that's not the Answers in Genesis. That's not the radical creationist type.
And I love how that ark that's in Kentucky that we've been talking about has dinosaurs in the cages. Like I want to know who on Noah's team, because I read the Bible as a kid thinking maybe there's something in here I need to learn. I read the Bible and I don't remember hearing about a Velociraptor Wrangler running around. Like, who's the poor bastard who had to try and get that shit done?
Yeah. And before they built the Ark, I went and visited the Creation Museum, which is, 40 miles away, but same group, same idea. And I didn't know as much back then. This is, 15 years ago, maybe, I don't know. But I noticed they had dragons everywhere. like there was a dragon room. There's a dragon theme. And this is when I was just starting to read about it. So yeah, 15, 20 years ago. And it turns out the dragons were a key thing because for this group, Answers in Genesis, dragons, like the dragons in various mythologies and folklores, those were like real. And what they were was people seeing dinosaurs.
Oh,
Calling them dragons.
right. It's like a whole Game of Thrones thing here.
Yeah, exactly. But the reason it's so important for folks like Answers in Genesis, these young Earth creationists, to put the dinosaurs in the cages on the Ark is because, and it makes sense. That's the thing about young Earth creationism. I think sometimes, like my sister-in-law, thought it was just a huge group of like dumb people, and that's not fair. I don't think that's accurate. It's a huge
I'll leave
group
that to you.
in my opinion. It's a huge group of people who have a separate and alternative and largely coherent group of ideas that they can teach their kids. And the dinosaurs, they only make sense in a coherent world. Because if it wasn't coherent, and tell me where I go off the rails here, Chris. If it wasn't coherent, the Answers in Genesis folks would get rid of the dinosaur part because they know that's the kookiest to you and me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like Flintstones level science. But they keep it and they emphasize it because it's a huge part of the coherence of the way they understand history. So dig, if God created Eden, all the animals, humans, and it just happened like the way they said in the book, there was an actual global flood, two of every kind of animal had to get on the boat. If that's true, if that's going to make any sense, then it has to include all the animals that ever lived squeezed into that, whatever, 6,000 year history, including dinosaurs. So it makes sense.
Yeah. This is something I've studied all my life, in leaving religion and being an atheist, is why people believe the things they do, whether it's religion or whether it's like little green Martian men or the world earth is flat, which we all know is true. Or, you know, whatever, pick your belief, you know, pick your stupid belief. We all have stupid beliefs and scotomas and stuff, and trying to get into reality is what seems to be a life goal, especially for some people. Let's put it that way. And so it's interesting to me what beliefs people choose to, and then that I'm trying to think what the right word is, but the attenuating system that they build around that belief to substantiate it, to give it validity, is quite extraordinary. Like, you know, the one thing about the ark is we brought two of every creature. Well, insects, microbiology, cells and different things. Did you make sure you got all that on there? Germs, flu bugs, I don't know, nuclear cells. Did you make sure that was all getting on the ark there with your little, like I said, whoever was the poor Velociraptor Tyrannosaurus Rex wrangler who had the stick and the rock and was trying to get in the ark, you stupid Velociraptors. And then I love the part with the 7 days, here's an omnipotent God, I guess. I don't know. Is that the right word? He's all powerful. He's all seeing. He builds the whole fucking universe. But, after 6 days of building the earth, this poor guy's got to rest because his back hurts or some shit. Like, what the fuck is that? So, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff that's in there that I just don't really get. So in the book, you get into all this stuff. Right.
Including some of the stuff. So one of my past academic books was about the history of evangelical colleges, places in the news now like Liberty University. That book was called Fundamentalist U.
I was sitting in the corner watching that with my wife and the pool boy too.
Yeah. So I think the thing that's important to understand, or one of the things that's important to understand, is that we non-creationists and even moderate creationists need to be careful about assuming that people who believe these ideas that are like scientifically impossible, like you say, really two of every microbe, for the last 50 years or so, these young earth creationists have debated all these things. Now, don't get me wrong. I bet there are plenty of just dumb, ignorant people of all beliefs, including young earth creationists. But in the colleges, you have these academics, and they're wrestling with those questions and other questions. Like, for example, physics. How could you possibly have enough rain in the clouds to cover the entire Earth? That's impossible. Like, that's just, and the scientists have said, well, no, they've worked out a different way of understanding reality.
Mm-hmm.
So reality broken into dispensations makes different sense. In the dispensation where there was Eden, you have a whole different layer in the firmament, in the sky, and the Bible explains it apparently. So I think one mistake that I made early is being, you don't need to assume that everyone is smart and a genius who believes these things that seem ridiculous.
Oh, I stopped assuming that a long fucking time ago, man.
Right. Yeah. And there are systems to each of it. So in chapter 5 of this book, I go into way too nerdy detail about what you learn when you go to a creationist college that makes you feel like you're learning science. You are learning a kind of science, and it's infinitely mysterious, and you can get the basics kind of early, easy, like Bio 101 at a school like mine, a public university. But then you know that you could get a PhD and get into more and more detail, and in fact spend your whole life studying a tiny little aspect of these sciences. So I do think that's an important part to understand creationism, is to understand it's more complicated than just people who don't care about science. People do care about science.
There's no way to say this without being critical, but I've often looked at some of the things that people subscribe to, the logs they hold on to get through this life, the belief system, let's call them that they subscribe to. They like the simplicity and the nature of it. Sometimes we do that in politics. We do that in everything, really. And there's a lot of people that would rather have the simple answer or the conveniently easier answer. Like, well, why is all this shit here? Jesus made it. And it's here for me. And then there's some sort of, there's some great real estate afterwards that we get, which I don't know why the whole thing had to go down, but that's the creator's business. But it's interesting to me, like for me, even as an atheist, I remember biology class and all the different things, cellular, macro level, all that kind of crap. That's really complex. I'm just going to stick with, I'm an atheist and I believe in science, but I don't really want to know the details. Mm-hmm. So even I'm guilty of doing give me the simple answer and let me run with that baby. But I feel a lot of people do that in religion, where they're just like, give me the preform construction manual and I'll just cite from it and we'll call it a day.
Yep. I agree entirely. I think you can even take it one step further, which is people want they want to know that there's a bunch of expert opinion out there that proves why what they already think is right.
Yeah.
So for example, in the book, I lay out the explanation that yes, radical creationism, the stuff about, a 6-day actual creation, the flood, a real flood, 6,000 year history, that kind of stuff. Yes, that's about religion, but mainly these days, it's about things like LGBTQ rights. In the 20th century, it was about things like communism and anti-communism. It's about things like abortion and climate change. It's not, yes, it's theological and yes, it's scientific, but the real disagreement doesn't come about the science of evolution or honestly, the theology of, biblical interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Real distinction comes about same-sex marriage, rights for, non-traditional couples, abortion rights, all the rest of the culture war issues that you would think have nothing to do with creationism. In fact, they have everything to do with creationism.
So you wrote the title of the book, Creationism USA. Is this a problem in other countries, or is this kind of our thing?
No, one of the things you read in the newspaper every once in a while, and even science guy Bill Nye, who is a great, I love him. My kid loved him. He even said that this is an American thing, and that's a misunderstanding. You can do it two different ways. First of all, you can look at the guy who built the Ark in Kentucky, Ken Ham. He's from Australia, so he's not even American. Some of the sort of more punchy critics call him, the Ayatollah of Kentucky, which I think is funny. But it kind of misunderstands American creationism because it makes it sound like he's, sort of from the backwoods or whatever. He's not. He's an international superstar from Australia. He's from a different country. He's a cosmopolitan, educated, he's an immigrant.
Plus money's money, right? If you can come up with a gimmick, makes it. I've owned like tens of corporations. Business is business. At least that's how. I don't know what his angle is, but let's talk about the coronavirus and Donald Trump. I guess let's start with coronavirus. How does the history of creationism help understand the politics of the coronavirus? Because we've seen a lot of this.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people have a hard time with it because it's a biomolecular, sort of structure. They think that the coronavirus shows up and goes, "Hi, can we hang out for a while?"
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked. I think I know, like, when I am in my circles of friends and acquaintances, you often hear this expression, like people will say, I understand maybe how people could support the president's policies and want to get more conservatives on the Supreme Court. I understand that stuff. What I don't understand, you'll hear people say, is how someone can, with a straight face, say that President Trump has mastered the science of fighting a pandemic when he says things like injecting disinfectant could be a cure, which he said back in the day.
Hang on, let me take a swig of this bleach here. And what were you saying about disinfectant?
You got to inject it.
Oh, it's injection? I've been drinking it. Damn it.
That's just a social thing, though.
This Clorox is nasty.
And I think it's similar to creationism in that you have people like me saying, how could anyone agree with President Trump's science? He's being anti-science, and he's not. If you look at, sometimes he is because he's everywhere. But generally what he says is, I've got better science. I have science on my side. Don't listen to those people who disagree with me because I've got the better science. And that's what generations now of these radical creationists have done. They haven't said, don't listen to science. They haven't said, hunker down in your Bible lined room and don't join the modern world. No, they said, actually, those scientists are not real scientists, the ones who say millions of years. Donald Trump, believe it or not, campaigns as if on the promise that he's got superior science. And the reason, I don't know if you saw this from 538, but this is just last week, over 80% of registered GOP voters, not just like Donald Trump in general, they approve of Donald Trump's handling of the COVID pandemic, which, to people like me just seems astounding. Say you might like the guy, but don't say that injecting bleach is good science. That's just, and this is where I think it gets so close to the whole key to understanding the world of creationism. People like me are tempted to be like you, and this is what Richard Dawkins said, the Oxford biologist. You got to be ignorant, you got to be insane, or you have to be wicked, was his word.
Or all three. And I think that's the wrong way to understand it. The key is not science. The key isn't even the Bible. The key, are you ready? Are you ready for the key? Go.
All right. The key is trust. People who trust the Donald believe that whatever people say about him is really fake news. And if it's fake news, who cares? If someone comes running in and I know they're a liar and they tell me something, I don't care how outrageous it is because I know they're lying. Now, young creationists have the best trump card, the best ace in the hole when it comes to trust. Because you remember the story, right? You got Eve in the garden. God had just said, hey, welcome to the garden. And for some strange God reason, do whatever you want, but don't eat that tree, the fruit from that tree. I can't tell you why, but don't. Trust me, don't. What the snake said, what the serpent said to Eve was alluring. The snake didn't say, I'm evil, go and come and join my team. And this apple from this tree is going to turn you evil. What the snake said was, I know better. Eat the apple from the tree, and then you'll know better.
It's knowledge.
So
the tree of knowledge, right?
Yeah, creationists say, hey, this is the oldest trick in the book. When those scientists come to you and say the earth has to be millions of years old, when those scientists come to you and say there's no way Adam and Eve something something something, that's the serpent's voice in your ear. And so don't only ignore it because you're dumb, ignore it because you're smart.
So this is kind of interesting what you're talking about. One of the aspects of that feature is narcissism, which Trump has. He's a malignant narcissist. You know, what was interesting is we had a gentleman on the show named Chuck DeGroat, and he wrote this book called When Narcissism Comes to Church, Healing Your Community from Emotional and Spiritual Abuse. We had him on the show. And one thing he talked about was one of the problems in religion is there's a lot of narcissism going on, especially with like preachers and reverend. And I wonder if that plays into what you were just talking about with, you know, people believing this narcissistic stuff.
I think it does. So not in the Creationism USA book, but in my academic research about, you know, the history of evangelical colleges, I spent a lot of time studying these colleges that, you know, of course, there's always been evangelical colleges, like Harvard was an evangelical college. But this kind started in the 1920s. And so I don't know how closely you've been following. Well, I know you've been closely following because I heard you talk about sitting in the corner with the pool boy.
Very closely following the pool boy in my life.
The story at Liberty University, I think to people who don't know the world of creationism and conservative evangelicalism, they think, and there was a great piece that just came out in Politico about the Falwells and the pool boy, and, you know, Becky and Jerry walking on campus and saying like, "Ooh, I'd do her. Ooh, I'd do him." You know, did you read this? It's pretty.
I didn't read that part yet. I've been missing that.
You got to read it. It's Brandon Ambrosino is one of the authors. It's a great piece. Michael Stratford and one more author. I'm slipping.
You know, I'm just at that point where like anytime that death protests too much, anytime you're a religious person, the harder you're banging that Bible about gays and marriage and, you know, whatever your thing is, the more I know that there's some closet with some giant ass skeletons on that topic in your house.
Right. And
like
so,
I'm just waiting for them to fall out.
Yeah. So, you know, the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, you're old enough to remember them. The Saddleback Rick Warren, you know, it's just scandal after scandal. And I think it's not, well, in my opinion, and, you know, from the 20th century history, it's nothing about like the actual religion. It's about this question of outsiders from mainstream American culture who have built up this culture of trust and mistrust. You know, if you're an insider, you have to go with what we're saying. Mm-hmm. Because those outsiders are always talking stuff about us and they're going to lie to you. Mm-hmm. So one thing that can happen, and a lot of times it doesn't happen, but it comes to the headlines when it does happen, is that an authoritarian leader can abuse easily these circles of trust and mistrust because mm-hmm. they can just say, oh, and this is how Jerry Falwell Jr. survived so long. He survived so long in spite of all these scandals because he could just say, that's the kind of thing the enemies of Liberty University have been saying forever.
Yeah, and he did. Yeah, I remember him saying that over the...
Yeah, they just want to bring down a Christian institution. Yeah. And the people who trust, who have built up this culture of trust and ferocious mistrust, it's not that they're dumb or even that they're gullible. Some of them might be. But that's a language that the institution has formalized and built into how it operates. So they got no leg to stand on to say, well, you know, there's no external, it's an authoritarian institution. There's no external group. There's a board of trustees only. There's no external group to call BS on that.
Yeah. What's interesting to me, and I don't know if you talk about this in the book, but it comes in the same play of this creationism and stuff, is the self-interest of all of this, where it's like, I must be exceptional. Like the thing we wake up to as human beings, and the thing that keeps up at night is, why are we here and what happens after we die and what was the purpose of me being here? We have to come out with some sort of exceptionalism, like I'm smarter than the snake, I'm smarter than the dog, which, you know, some people aren't. Clearly, if you've ever watched fail videos or America's Greatest whatever video show, hold my beer is the famous last words. But there's always this exceptionalism to it. Like today, I was speaking with somebody with good intentions, and we were talking about the human body, and they'd seen some different things about the human body and how great it was. And, and the implication is because it was built by a divine being in their own image. It's always interesting. Like everyone's always like, we're built in, some guy's image. For all we know, I don't know, God is some sort of space alien who's purple and he's got weird ears, pick your science fiction movie. And, we're just like an ant farm. He's like, let's build some fucked up creatures. And if you've ever read or studied biology, we're really messed up build. I mean, the way that we give birth, the way that our eyes are in our head compared to other creatures. I mean, just the whole evolutional build of us is a fucking shit show. Like there's no divine intervention there for most of the biologists that I've seen read or write about this. But it's always that exceptionalism they have to get into. Like, I'm here for a purpose. Why? Some special vapor in the ether guy decided that I should be built and I'm here for that purpose. Well, what's your purpose? I don't know, man. It's it's in the book or something. It's always interesting to me how that always has that sort of selfish sort of interest to it.
Oh yeah. And I want to be careful with this point because it can be misinterpreted, but historically you get that sense of sort of intellectual hubris on the side of creationism and young earth creationism, but you also get it from these missionaries for science through history. And I don't think this is what you're saying, but I do think that there's this tradition that the phrase that people pick up on is one that Darwin used. There's a grandeur in this view of life, meaning once you really understand sort of evolutionary processes and the way it works, it's not, like you said, it's not that these bodies were created to be perfect. It's that these bodies exist at all, with the appendix that we don't need anymore, but we have it for evolutionary reasons, which with these hands, which, like when you study the different, the bat's hands or the bat's wings and the dog's paw and the human's hand, you can see evolutionarily this is not necessarily how they would be designed if you had every range of choices. You were stuck evolutionarily with things. But there are these missionaries for science who take this idea that you're talking about, like this exceptional idea, and they use it for the non-religious, like the other side of evolution. And one of I think the reasons why we fight so much about evolution unnecessarily is because we shouldn't care. And by we, I mean the American public square. I should care. You should care. My mom should care. Your mom should care. Like people should care about themselves and their families and their churches or their clubs or whatever. But if we're making up laws and curricula for schools and for town meetings, we should painstakingly not care what people want to believe about this stuff. So we need to get rid of the exceptionalism part and just let, even if we don't like it, we should let the best science or history or literature, that should be what we teach in schools.
And we've seen the destructive element of ignoring science or disputing it or just being like, yeah, whatever. I've even had people say with the coronavirus, well, if it's God's will that I get coronavirus, then I'll get it, or God will protect me from the coronavirus. I think we've all seen the different preachers who've said that and died of coronavirus. It's interesting to me how extraordinary we'll be at ignoring the obvious or science. I feel for. I kind of feel for parents. I didn't have kids, but I've often thought, what would I have thought or done if my child looked up to me and said, hey, Daddy, why are we here and what goes on thereafter? And if grandma dies or puppy dog dies, what happens to the puppy dog? And it's so much easier to go with well, son, there's like a heaven and a special place they go to. For me as an atheist, it's just like, they just end. There's just nothing. I remember Mormons used to say to me, they'd be like, "What if you die and there's just blackness?" I'll be like, "Well, I won't know because it will just be blackness. I mean, I'm not going to be laying around in blackness going, this blackness fucking sucks. I wish I could get a Coke." You know, it's just, it'll be over, right? So, you know, I often wonder about it. It certainly is convenient to have some of these pre-built construction things, because then you can go, you know, even, I got to tell you, honestly, even after my first dog died and I went through a really painful time losing what I termed as a child, I really wanted to subscribe to some of those things like the Rainbow Bridge or that there's a heaven. Like I could just really feel my brain just going, we could believe that shit. That sounds good. Let's do that because it makes it hurt less. But, you know, I mean, but then I got to cross over into the fantasy land, and that's like a whole spin cycle hole that just, you know, never ends if I try to cross that line, at least in my opinion. So it's interesting to me how we go through all these different things. What are some other aspects in the book that we haven't touched on?
One of them is similar to what you're bringing up, which is that people tend to put their belief first and their science second. So, for example, there have been a couple of studies, and you know, studies don't really show usually what people want them to show, what I'd like them to show, but it's suggestive here that, so for example, in one study that they did with Harvard undergrads, they taught a unit about evolution, and before and after they asked students to talk about what they kind of thought about evolution and what they knew about evolution. So after studying evolution, they knew more about evolution, and it didn't change much what they believed about it. And here's one of the points that's a tough takeaway. People in that study, and they focused specifically on the concepts of natural selection and other, you know, key terms in the sort of neo-Darwinian synthesis evolution. It didn't matter in that study how well they could explain natural selection, compared to how much they said they believed it. So people would say they believed it and not know it, or people would say they don't believe it and they do know it. And so the knowledge and belief, ignorance and understanding, it's all messed up. And so there's another one at Louisiana State undergrads, and they same thing. So the student that really sticks with me, he's like, "Oh, I definitely think evolution is true." And they're like, "Okay, so how does it work?" And it sticks with me, obviously. So the student says, "All right, so there's cheetahs, right? And cheetahs are like, we're hungry." So they decided to run faster so they could get more food, or else they go extinct. That's evolution. And that's not, I mean, that's like that's maybe a Family Guy level explanation of evolutionary science. You know, it's like, no, there wasn't a meeting of cheetahs, you know, and they didn't
We should learn to run faster.
Yeah, they didn't.
Come on down to the Run Faster Cheetah Workshop today.
Yeah,
7 a.m.
Plan. That's you know, one of the concepts that's tough about things like natural selection is a lot of our minds, as you've been saying, are sort of, I don't want to say hardwired, but they tend to look for cause. They tend to look for explanation. And if there isn't a cause or an explanation, they'll make one up to fit. And so this student studied, he studied evolution, and they're like, "All right, come back and tell us what you think." He's like, "Well, I still think evolution is true." And then he went back to his cheetahs. He's like, "Okay, so the cheetahs didn't decide to run faster. It's just that over time, they realized that they had to run faster over time." And it's like, you know, and I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for 20 years now. And so I love this kid. You know, it's like, because either way, I just picture him. And none of this is in the study. I'm just picturing him both times being entirely confident in explaining these wacky schemes. So like the second time he got closer, you know, he's like, all right, cheetahs over time learn to run faster. It's like, all right, buddy, I love you, but that's not right either. That's not what evolutionary theory says. The point being, the studies seem to suggest that if we want to talk about ignorance and evolution, it's not just a one-way street. It's not just that the people who believe evolution are in the know and creationists are ignorant. Some are, some aren't. Some people believe evolution and they don't know anything about it. Some disbelieve and they don't know anything about it. Some disbelieve and they know a bunch about it. Some believe and they know a ton about it. It's just a mess.
Yeah. So how do we resolve it all? How do we, I mean, have we just been living with creationism USA for all this 200 plus whatever years of our republic, or is there any resolve to this? Are we going to keep wandering around the dark like a gang of idiots?
In my mind, the solution will come in a way that gives me optimism that it might actually work with real, live, actual Americans. Because the solution doesn't come from heroic striving. The solution comes from people like me, like you, like science teachers, like Baptist ministers, people agreeing at what point they're just going to relax and go back home and sit on the couch.
Yeah.
So for example,
just educate yourselves. I mean, I think we need more leaders, like you say, that advocate for science. See, if I was like a creationist, I'd get really good with it. Like my thing would be like, yeah, there was evolution, but Jesus made it happen. Jesus said, you're a cheetah and you're a snake. That's what I do.
So back to the coronavirus.
And I charge for it.
I know you've been following folks like the head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins, mapper of the human genome, like America's like hero science guy. He is a leading creationist.
Wow.
He inspired a group who does exactly what you say. They call themselves biologos. And their point is to tell Christians, particularly because they're Christian, look at God. The Francis Collins quote is, the God of the Bible is the God of the genome. God's all powerful. He doesn't have to give us a book that spells it out like in comic book form. Here's what happened with the flood and the garden and the snake. That's, those are important stories and they're from God, but it doesn't mean it's like exactly what happened. So the biologos folks say exactly what you talk about. All of that. And by the way, so do Catholic.
Damn, I was going to make some money off this.
So do Muslims, so do Judaic organizations, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. There's this huge agreement among religious people that that's how to do this.
Wow. Here I thought I had a new thing that I could take out and make some money tax-free on. Damn it.
Can, because the real puzzle is that this is this huge zone of agreement. You got religious people, you got atheists, you got Jewish people, Muslim people, Catholic people, Protestant people. Everyone agrees on this, and yet, where's the publicity? Where's the attention?
I think I'm gonna pull like a Joseph Smith from the LDS Church and just do like a spin the wheel, collect them all sort of thing. Just whatever you want to be on Sunday, spin the wheel over there, and you're Jewish one week, and whatever you want, have fun.
Have fun. And that's what gives me hope, though, is that
pick a religion of the hat, run with it, baby.
There's this huge middle zone for religious people and non-religious people. If we can agree on what our public institutions want to do, like schools, which we're all almost everyone is on board with, then we can just stop talking about the stuff we don't agree on, and that's not bad. We can agree to disagree on whether you're dumb if you think there was an actual global flood. Like my uncle, he's not that uncle, he's the uncle for science, who would say, wait, no, you have to realize that there couldn't be a global flood. It's like, nope. I mean, when it comes to public discussions, sorry, we don't have to agree on that. You can write on Facebook anything you want about how dumb that is. Fine. But what you can't do is say that the people who believe that don't have a right to go to public schools and learn science without being made fun of for their belief in lots of rain and something like boats and dinosaurs.
And we've had some really good authors who have talked about this on the show. You have some very evil organizations like the Betsy DeVos Council that their whole idea is not only to teach this, but to use it as a recruitment tool to get people that aren't religious, people like me, obviously when I was a child, to get me recruited into buying into the whole Jesus thing instead of going off on my evil satanic atheist march. And they want to force that curriculum onto the schools, right?
Yep. And that's something that I guess the principle is religious people, especially radical creationists and any religious minority, because they are a minority and they just don't know it. They should be the ones who push for religion neutral public schools the hardest. I'm not saying that they don't push for it, because obviously they do. Just go to a Friday night football game in Council, Texas, and you'll see the cheerleaders with their Bible slogans and stuff like that. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
In mini skirts.
And mini skirts, the biblically approved mini skirts. Of course it happens, but the idea is, in my opinion, there's such a large group of people, including the same savvy conservatives who push for more religion in public schools, who will realize that it's a knife that cuts both ways. If you push for religion in public schools, and this happened at the Supreme Court with the Espinosa decision, if you want to push for tax funding for religion in public schools, if you're religious, it's a dangerous game to play, because in a constitutional realm, you're opening the door to have religious ideas that you don't want crammed down the kids' throats in public schools, which is why in the 1960s, the 1962 prayer decision, Engel v. Vitale, Supreme Court decision, and it was conservative Catholics, conservative Protestants. The Supreme Court said you cannot, the state of New York in this case, cannot have a prayer in public schools. And so you'd think that religious people would be mad. But back then, conservative evangelicals, conservative Catholics, they said, thank you to the court. We do not want the state of New York government to make up a prayer for our kids, because they saw the dangers of a government making up a prayer. Like for me, if I'm not religious, whatever, go ahead, have them say whatever. They're not going to listen anyway. But if you're actually religious and you care about how your kids pray, that's when that's a really terrifying idea. So I know what you're saying. Conservative religious folks are pushing for more religious in tax-funded public schools, and that's bad, and it's worth opposing. But I think it's also self-defeating, because pushing religion into public schools the people who get hurt by it most are religious people.
Which is ironic, because there is prayer in public schools these days. Mostly it's a prayer that you won't die today of the shooter who comes by your school. Yeah. I actually saw on TikTok last night, there were 3 girls that were talking about how great Donald Trump was. And then one of the factors they said is that he's lowered school shootings this year. And you're like, wait, there's a quarantine? Yeah. Kids learning from laptops, it's a little hard to get shot. So anyway, there's that. Well, this has been an interesting discussion. The book is Creationism USA, Bridging the Impasse on Teaching Evolution. Is there anything we missed? We want to leave some of this book, of course, to people to buy it and read it and get into the details.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. It's been great talking with you. I do think that all these issues cut across groups of people. It's not just a question for religious people. It's not just a question for atheists. It's anybody who is involved at all in American public life. Creationism is one way to understand all these debates about who to trust, who not to trust, who our side is, who their side is. It was creationism and evolution where all those debates got sort of market tested back in the 60s. So I think it's buy 20 copies for all your friends.
There you go, guys. Check it out, and give us your plugs so people can find you on the interwebs and buy the book.
Sure, yeah. I tweet my name. It's ADAMLAATS at Adam Lotz. You can also check out the blog. The blog is I Love You, But You're Going to Hell. And it's been on pause for the pandemic, but we used to have a little lively community where we discuss all these issues. So check that out. You can find more information about the book there as well.
Yeah, that sounds like my favorite argument to religious people, because they're like, well, this is what's going to happen if you die, Chris. And I always go, well, what if you're wrong? And they go, blah, 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 blah. And I go, but what if you're wrong? You have to assume the possibility that you could be wrong. It's, you know, and they just never have an answer. That's my argument. I just go, but what if you're wrong?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's that. Thank you very much, Adam, for being on the show, telling us about your book and all the good stuff and sharing with us brilliant thinking. Thanks for being on with us today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Chris. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, my audience, for tuning in. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss to see the video version of this and all of the wonderful, brilliant authors we've had on the show. You can go to thecvpn.com, subscribe to online podcasts. You can also go to book or goodreads.com/Chris Voss, and also facebook.com/The Chris Voss Show. Thanks to everyone for being here. Be safe, stay safe, wear your masks, and today's vote day, so I don't have to say that anymore. Be safe out there, folks, and be good to your other human beings. We'll see you next time.